Shwmae a chroeso I Sgwrs, podlediad Consortiwm Canolbarth y De. Yn y podlediad hwn byddwch chi'n clywed y trafodaethau diweddara am bob math o bethau addysg. Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the Central South Consortium podcast. In this podcast we'll bring you the very latest discussions on all things education.
Hello and welcome to our podcast. I'm Clarissa Brind, Assistant Head of Read at Pennau, and today I'm joined by
Rebecca Connor, Senior Assistant Head Teacher at Samuel School, Penarth.
Nikki Williams, Assistant Head at Romley Primary School in Barry.
And Liz Durant, Elenco and Knee Practitioner at Romley.
Today we're going to be talking about well-being, which at this current time is more important than ever for both our learners and staff. So we're going to start our discussion today thinking about our vision for health and well-being and how this has continued to be realised in remote learning. So Bex, what would you say about the importance of your vision and how important it's been to focus on that inclusivity and equity?
Okay, I think for us, the important thing is that the vision for health and well-being is that it's not bolt-on, that it's authentic and organic in everything that we do. So when we went into a period of school closure, we wanted that to permeate everything that the children did at home. We did have to amend and adapt some things, but we felt very strongly that our vision should come through the pedagogical approaches used by staff, the structure of the school day, the communications that our children and the young people had, and also the systems that we had in place physically in school. We would try to replicate those remotely. So, for example, in school, we have a daily thought for the day, which encourages reflection and gives the children a moment of stillness during the day. So instead of doing that in a physical environment, we have sent the children a daily mindfulness challenge or well-being focus, just something totally outside of their lesson time that they can stop and reflect and think about themselves and be present in the moment. And lots of the young people have really said that's given them a structure to their day and started their day off in a positive frame of mind.
Yes, no, I can imagine that's a really good way to start, like you said, the learning and to start at that moment of calm when you're trying to gather your thoughts and begin your learning. What about yourselves in Romilly, Liz, Nikki? What would you say in terms of how your vision has continued to be realised within remote learning?
As Beck said, we thought about the structures that already work and things that we know work already. So, for example, we have a TLR in each year group. So we kept that model when we went into our hub provision. We made our teams so that each team had a TLR, so that there was somebody that's there to support the rest of the team and the staff felt supported and that was good for their well-being, because we recognised very early on that we needed to support our staff's well-being first in order for them to then support our children's well-being.
Yeah, and similar to Stanwell as well, we wanted our vision to be visible in everything we did and our decisions. So when we were having those discussions right at the start, we kept going back to our vision and saying, does this fit with our vision? And then our decision making was based on that. Will it support our vision? So our head, he talks about our vision as our moral purpose, and it's about inclusive and parity for all. So everything that we offered, it had to meet that criteria so that nobody could be excluded because of their circumstances. And that was the question we kept going back to.
Clarissa, can I come in there? Because we also thought that it was really important to develop a sense of well-being with our pupils through the diet and the range of activity that they had. So we did a lot of research onto what our remote blended learning offer would look like. And we believe really strongly that should be exactly that, a blend to allow the children to experience different forms of pedagogy while they're at home. So our children would experience within the structure of their school day, which followed their usual timetable, because structure was very important to us and our young people. maintain that sense of well-being. But our staff were really innovative, I think, with our practices in terms of blended learning. So they included live streaming, pre-recorded examples, Loom videos, Flipgrid examples, so that we were always trying to develop that innovative practice, which was in line with effective learning and teaching, but also promoted that sense of well-being as the children had an extremely varied diet.
Yeah, absolutely. And then underpinning teaching and learning experiences with that real focus on well-being, very much as you were saying there, Liz, about using your vision to guide decisions and being a key part of any decision making conversation. So what would you say then in terms of whether you further developed any practices that you introduced in the first lockdown in light of the difference that you saw it had on well-being?
So in the first lockdown, again, we wanted well-being to be the focus and parity for all. So we offered almost like a menu of options. And because for younger children, it's about social and emotional interaction, relationships, play, we ensured that the learning on offered was to support foundations for learning. So it was practical activities, collaborative activities, physical activities, social activities, emotional activities, so that whilst they weren't in the classroom, they were still learning the skills to become a lifelong learner. And then when they came in, we ensured that the activities built on those skills. And then in the second lockdown, we went more to Google Classroom.
Yes,
and we didn't go for live learning, because for us live learning meant that some of our children wouldn't be supported because of their age and they needed a parent at home with them. That wasn't inclusive and sticking to the vision. So our online learning offer, whilst the teachers greeted them in the morning with a review of the day, all the lessons had video or audio that were banked, so it was available to the family when it suited them, because we didn't want to exclude people, because little ones did need one-to-one support.
It also forced our hand really into really focusing on what matters for our learning. So we had to decide very early on, what are the non-negotiables that we want these children to be taught? And that really then drove the sorts of lessons that we were providing for our children. And obviously well-being was definitely a non-negotiable for us, and it definitely is what matters to the children.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to those key decisions and those conversations really driven by your vision and how that makes a difference and what that looks like in your classroom. What about yourself, Bex? How did that impact your decisions?
Oh my gosh, I mean, for us, talking about the first lockdown to the second lockdown, the journey that we've been on in terms of understanding ourselves and upskilling staff. We're really fortunate, I think, in our school in that we've got an established and an embedded culture for professional learning. So we drew on that straight away, and we changed the focus of our professional learning. We delivered it remotely to enable staff to be as upskilled as they could on the technological platforms, the safeguarding issues associated with remote learning, and the innovation and creativity in what they did. So that was really, really important for us. In the first lockdown, we were limited to a certain extent by policy and guidance with regard to live streaming. So we wanted to make sure that we took our time, that our staff were upskilled, and they were able to facilitate live learning, being mindful of their own well-being as well. So we didn't initially start the live stream. We then developed that as part of our blend as our understanding grew. And that was quite an important change. So during the second lockdown, there was a much greater emphasis on live stream, and our pupils actually told us that was a really good initiative in terms of their well-being and their engagement and keeping in touch with staff and others. So that was quite interesting. The other major change for us was during the first lockdown, we amended and adapted our timetable. We didn't quite know what the pandemic was about. We didn't know what our families would be going through. And we actually went to a sort of structure whereby children would experience 3 or 4 lessons in a day. And then we found out that actually that lack of structure or change of structure perhaps wasn't best in terms of well-being. And what our young people really needed was to be able to get up at the normal time and follow a school day at home.
Maintain
so during the second
structure.
lockdown, we went straight over to their normal timetables delivered in real time at home, to enable that sense of well-being and structure. And we had to sort of give our pupils some support in that. We created an Adobe Spark document with really what seemed simple at the time, but it turns out that it wasn't happening for some of our children and young people. You know, this should be your structure of the day. Set your alarm for this time, have a snack at this time, then go down and speak to your family or whoever you live with at lunchtime. So we had to give some real tangible and very simple guidance around the structure of the day in order to improve that well-being for our young people.
Did you feel that made a difference? Was the pupil response a positive one?
Yeah, pupil and parental response was much more positive during the second lockdown, when we adapted our practice based on what we'd learned from the first time round, really. And also the policy and the guidance adapted, which went in our favour because it meant that live streaming was much more accessible for us. We didn't have to have the 2 teachers. So in terms of teacher time and workload, that made it much more accessible. And it was an important part of our blend.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously then in terms of staff wellbeing, touching on that, you've just mentioned there, reducing the number of people who needed to be there for live streaming then had an impact on workload for members of staff. How would you say in your schools that you identified any of those children who needed perhaps additional wellbeing support during remote learning?
So who's going to go first on that one?
I think for us, Liz, I don't mind going first. I think for us, there was a number of things, really. We established very quickly engagement logs, whereby every subject teacher would indicate whether the child had engaged, and that would be then passed to the pastoral team so they could identify any patterns and then make contact with children where there were alarm bells ringing, really. But also our communication with our children and our families has changed but increased. So we now have a weekly communication with parents and our young people, and there are over 2,000 of them, so it's no mean feat. But to ensure that everybody knows what's happening, everybody knows what to expect that week. And all of our form teachers and pastoral team would make direct contact with their learners, so that every learner had an adult that they could share any concerns with. So there was the direct contact to discuss well-being, but also the engagement logs, which allowed us to track that data and respond if children hadn't disclosed that they were struggling in any way, shape or form.
Yeah, so those immediate signposting systems were put in place really effectively. What about yourselves, Liz and Nikki?
Quite similar. So from first lockdown, we went to weekly telephone calls, and because we wanted to reduce the anxiety for our staff about what to say and how to say it, we created scripts for all sorts of things. So if they were phoning up about free school meal vouchers, if it was a wellbeing call, if it was an academic call, we made scripts to help the teachers navigate those conversations. But actually, they were only needed for a few weeks, because once the system was in place, the confidence grew and everybody was happy. So during those phone calls, so the teachers would log the phone calls, and anything that was of a concern would be triggered and accelerated to one of the SLT. And if we felt their vulnerability needed external agency, then one of us would phone up to signpost to those services. But if it was something that perhaps we could help with, those children were invited in. So obviously we were running the first lockdown hub and the second critical care, but anybody who had a vulnerability about them was then also offered to come in. And we tried to ensure that those children came in on their teacher's day and their LSA's day. And you know this already, but everybody in the Vale of Glamorgan is trauma informed. So we've ensured that the trauma informed philosophy is very visible in the school. So, you know, the available adult, the activities that they do online, the activities that they do in school, they all have those trauma-informed style activities.
And those phone calls were invaluable. And as Beck said, the parents really opened up to us. We've built much closer relationships with the whole community. Previously, they would trust us academically and, you know, open up to us in that sense. But they were opening up to us with their own mental health issues and with their own financial difficulties. And they were really telling us some quite personal stuff. And that really helped us then to understand how we can help them better. And it wasn't a one size fits all. It was well, this approach might be best for this family, but this family might need something different because their needs, their personalities wouldn't suit the original approach.
Yeah, and that's something that we really don't want to lose. We have got better relationships now than we've ever had before.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. And relationships are key, aren't they, to building all sorts of foundations? Absolutely.
Sorry, and we were also able to apply for some grants. So we used the grants to, you know, if we knew somebody was financially struggling or emotionally struggling. So we had hampers going out, pizza kits, fruit bags. So as well as the phone call, if we felt a parent or a family was in need, we could actually go and deliver and have a chat on the doorstep, which again, just knowing that we were there for them, I think boosted their confidence in us as a school and as a, you know, a place to turn to in difficulty.
Definitely. Those are genuine relationships, aren't they? And really wanting to make a difference. Yeah.
I would agree with that, Clarissa, because in our school, obviously there are a huge amount of pupils, over 2,000, as I've said before. So for us, it was important to make the contact, but also make the contact with the appropriate adult in school. So, for example, our ALN learners would make contact with our Alan Cohen, our LSA team, and our pastoral team would make contact with those vulnerable learners who they had quite a detailed knowledge of the context of that family. So, you know, that was really important. And like you say, Liz, going around and visiting and dropping off resources and laptops and exercise books, it really is a different way of working, but a really nice way of working and understanding your children, your young people and their context.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on, would you continue to develop some of those areas that you've talked about now and mentioned that can continue to improve well-being when schools reopen, for families, for staff, for pupils? There's some really exciting key opportunities there for you. Is that something you're going to further?
Certainly, I think for us the communication will continue, the weekly communication with parents and pupils, because it just informs people of school decisions and why we're doing what we're doing, which is quite useful. One of the huge things we will take from this has been about children who are struggling with persistent absenteeism, because actually some of those children had not engaged prior to the pandemic at all. I'm talking a really high level need, but through remote learning, we've been able to engage with those children and those families. And we've now made sure that we've allocated a member of staff who will continue to teach only a handful of children who, you know, it's very, very obvious are unable to attend school at the moment. And she is going to continue to make sure their learning progresses through teaching of core subjects and check-ins. So we've actually had more to do with those pupils than ever before, and we will certainly continue that.
I think it's worth remembering, though, that although schools are coming back, the situation is ongoing for our families. So their finances haven't suddenly recovered just because schools are back, or if they've had a bereavement, that sadness hasn't gone away. So we need to keep that in mind, that things aren't back to normal for our families.
No, absolutely. We're living in the pandemic still, aren't we? And that's a really good point to make there, Nikki. Absolutely.
I think that's massively important. And where we are at the moment now is thinking about what does the return to school look like for our children in terms of well-being? And we haven't been able to pin down this at the moment because we need to see what the restrictions are like. But we certainly have a vision of focusing on enrichment activities for our young people wherever possible. In the summer term, we'd like to create those experiences that they've missed out on, you know, year group barbecues, interform football matches, artistic activities, trips down to Penarth Beach to do yoga on the pebbles. You know, we really would like to create some sort of enrichment weeks or enrichment days where all our pupils can access that. We did over lockdown try to continue our extracurricular provision, particularly in terms of PE and health and wellbeing. And our PE teachers put on a live virtual circuit training and aerobic session every week for staff and pupils. And we could see from that how much this enrichment is still so important.
Yes,
and we really, really want to make sure that we build in that, you know, as our pupils return, so that because actually, most of our pupils in Stanwell have continued to learn. Our engagement has been really high, but what all of them haven't had is enrichment, sport and creative activities. So that for us is the major thing in terms of catch up, giving the children the chance to do that.
And the connections, with their peers, absolutely. Connections, isn't it? Rebuilding those connections again and rejoining within their peer groups, absolutely. What would you say, Liz and Nikki, that you plan to focus on now as your learners return to school? Are there any particular key areas that you're going to develop?
I think we need to think about what experience each of the children have had, because it's not going to be the same for all of them. Some have had full-time one-to-one support with their mum or dad or grandparent, and have thrived in this situation. Whereas for others, they have been completely isolated and they haven't had that opportunity. So we need to think about, are they able to be able to play and socialise? We need to think about their physical health as well, their sleep and their nutrition. And then think about the 4 purposes and how our knowledge of those can help to address those issues for those children that haven't had the opportunities that some of them have had.
Yeah, so our goal is to get everybody ready for learning in what shape that is, because, you know, we have embraced the 4 purposes here and we are after lifelong learners. So we have reduced the curriculum, we've got breathing space, and it's about doing those things well to ensure the children have the confidence, the self-belief, the perseverance, you know, acceptance. Those are the skills that we're really working on at the moment. But one of the practical things we did to be COVID compliant, we had to rearrange the school. So historically, lots of the interventions were run externally, but to be operational, all the classes had to have a TA with them, and Key Stage 2 have absolutely thrived in that environment, because in their own one class, the teacher and LSA is with them for the whole day. They're not going to the canteen, because we're a large school as well, we're about 740. You know, they're not in the canteen with 300 children, they're not on the yard with 400 children, they're in their class bubble for their breaks, their lunches, and they have adored it. And it means that, you know, the intervention is happening within the classroom, it's inclusive. So we've probably caused ourselves a little bit of heartache over that decision, because Key Stage 2 are really enjoying the new setup.
With every challenge, there's an opportunity, Liz, isn't it? Absolutely.
Clarissa, while we're talking about challenges, I think one thing from a secondary level that it would be remiss of us not to mention here is, for secondary leaders and teachers, managing wellbeing and anxiety surrounding the centre determined grades, because there is a lot of worry in the system from our young pupils about what that is going to look like and what they need to do. So we've had to be very, very clear with our messages that we give to parents and pupils, that we've moved away from this being examinations and that this is about assessed learning activities. And the language that we've used and the constant reinforcement of those messages has been important. it would be naive of me to say that that's still not a challenge. And lots of the emails that we're having from our pupils and our parents are about the CDGs. And obviously we almost need a follow-up podcast to evaluate how successful the managing of that has been in terms of anxiety and well-being. But we are trying our very, very best to give our children the message that this is about supportive learning activities that will be assessed as part of a holistic approach to the CDG. That's a difficulty in the system at the moment.
It's not helped either by the media, is it? So, you know, sometimes it's false news what's reported, and I would imagine that increases anxiety quickly.
Absolutely. So what we've actually just created, one of our colleagues, the deputy head, has just made a video actually of him talking to the children so that everybody gets the same messages. Very first lesson they come back now on Monday the 15th, that's going to be played to everybody in every classroom in years 10 through to 13, so that everybody's got this one version of the truth, and that is about managing anxiety and well-being and making sure that children understand what this is about in terms of holistic judgments.
Yeah, most definitely. That clear, consistent message where everybody knows that they're working together for the same goal. Yeah, really important. Well, ladies, I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you this afternoon, finding out as much as we can about what we've put in place in terms of well-being, because as we said at the very beginning, it is of such high importance at the moment, and we're using terms recovery and catch up. But as we've explored now within the podcast, that it's very much about meeting the needs of all of our learners and staff who have had extremely different personal experiences throughout this pandemic. And I think there's lots of key areas there for us to pause for thought as well and think about further. Well, there's a lot of support on the CSC website. Within the Knowledge Bank, there's the Equity and Wellbeing Supporting Vulnerable Learners playlists, which have a wide range of information within them. There's also the CSC Wellbeing Community as well, which has got access to a number of different documents and resources, and they are always there and are being updated on a regular basis. Well, thank you ever so much, all of you, and thank you for your time, and hope there's been some food for thought for different people who may be listening.
Diolch am wrando ar y bennod hon o Sgwrs. Cofiwch ein dilyn ar Twitter a Facebook, tanysgrifio ein sianel YouTube, ymuno yn cymunedau ar ein gwefan a darllen ein bwletin ysgolion wythnosol am y newyddion diweddaraf. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sgwrs. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our online communities via our website, and read our weekly school bulletin for the latest news. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now.